Hey everyone, we're back. I'm Minister James Moss. This is Continuing Education, and we are in the book of Luke. We're in chapter 11, and we're about to conclude chapter 11 with covering verses 37 through 54. This one is entitled Jesus Criticizes the Religious Leaders. Okay, and let's just get to it. All right, so here we go. Placed after Jesus' teaching about the inner light as an example of those caught in darkness, the Pharisees and the experts in religious law. Let me read that again. Placed after Jesus' teaching about the inner light is an example of those caught in darkness, the Pharisees and the experts in the religious law. It just don't make sense. These religious leaders had meticulously cleaned the outside of the cup, but had not bothered to look at the filthiness of their souls. All right. So I guess it's basically saying that placed after Jesus' teaching about the inner light is an example of those caught in darkness. Okay. Which would be the Pharisees and the experts of religious law. See, I hate when the people write incomplete sentences. It's just, it throws you. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go to the rest of the chapter. All right, verse 37. As he spake, a certain Pharisee besought him to dine with him, and he went in and sat down to meat. And when the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. And the Lord said unto him, Now do ye Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the plate and the platter, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness? Ye fools, did not he that made that which is without make that which is within also? But rather give alms of such things as ye have, and behold, all things are clean unto you. But woe unto you, Pharisees, for ye tithe mint and rue and all manners of herbs, and pass over judgment and pass over judgment and the love of God. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. Woe unto you, Pharisees, for ye love the uppermost seats in the synagogues and greetings in the markets. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are as graves which appear not, and the men that walk over them are not aware of them. Then answered one of the lawyers and said unto him, Master, thus saying thou reproachest us also. And he said, Woe unto you also, ye lawyers, for ye lade men with burdens grievous to be borne, and yourselves touch not the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe unto you, for ye build the sepulchres of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. Truly ye bear witness that ye allow the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed kill them, and ye build their sepulchres. Therefore also said the wisdom of God, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they shall slay and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation, from the blood of Abel unto the blood of Zechariah, which perished between the altar and the temple. Verily I say unto you, it shall be required of this generation. Woe unto you, lawyers, for ye have taken away the key of knowledge. Ye entered not in yourselves, and them that were entering in ye hindered. And as he said these things unto them, the scribes and the Pharisees began to urge him vehemently, and to provoke him to speak of many things, laying wait for him and seeking to catch something out of his mouth that they might accuse him. Sometimes KJV can just be exhausting trying to read through. Verses 37 and 38. Again, Jesus was invited to a meal with a Pharisee. They're going to get enough to invite him to dinner, right? Or to any meal. Jesus offended his host, however, because he did not first perform the ceremonial washing. This washing was done not for health reasons, but as a symbol of washing away any contamination from touching anything unclean. Not only did the Pharisees make a public show of their washing, but they also commanded everyone else to follow a practice originally intended for the priests. Verses 39 and 40. Obsessed about ceremonial purity, the Pharisees neglected their own internal defilement. They washed on the outside like one would wash a cup or a dish, but they left the inside full of greed and wickedness, never bothering to deal with those sins. They were no more pure than a dirty cup. Jesus condemned the Pharisees and religious leaders for outwardly appearing saintly and holy, but inwardly remaining full of corruption. Jesus accordingly castigated these Pharisees as fools. God, who made the outside of each person, also made the inside. In other words, God is just as concerned with the inside as with the outside. He is not only concerned about what you do, but also who you are. Verse 41, the Pharisees loved to think of themselves as clean, but their stinginess toward God and the poor proved that they were not as clean as they thought. Jesus wanted to stress the importance of the inward over the outward, here focusing on the importance of a right attitude and when giving to the poor. The inner attitude must match the outward action in order for them to be clean all over. Verse 42, Jesus pronounced how terrible it would be for the Pharisees because although they were keeping the tiniest details of the law, ceremony, and custom and tradition, they were forgetting justice and the love of God. Jesus did not condemn the practicing of tithing, even of small amounts, if one chose to do so. Jesus condemned the Pharisees for being scrupulous in less important matters while completely neglecting the larger issues that were far more important, such as dealing correctly and fairly with people and building a relationship with God. Verse 43, Jesus condemned the Pharisees for their love of public importance and honor. The elders sat on the seats of honor in the synagogues at the front near the place where the scrolls of the Torah were kept. Those seats faced the congregation to receive respectful greetings was a highly treasured honor. Jesus condemned the attitude that focused on the perks of position while they forgot their responsibilities to be teachers. The Pharisees loved to receive honor and deference from ordinary people, yet they did not love or desire to serve those people. Instead, they often showed contempt for them as lower than themselves. Verse 44, this third condemnation pictures the Pharisees for all their ceremonial cleanliness as actually typifying the worst sort of uncleanness. The Old Testament law said a person who touched a grave was unclean. Sometimes a body might be buried in an unmarked grave, causing an unwary traveler to become ceremonially unclean by walking over it. Jesus accused the Pharisees of actually being hidden graves who made others unclean by their spiritual rottenness. Like graves hidden in a field, the Pharisees corrupted everyone who came in contact with them. Wow. Verses 45 and 46, Jesus did not back down from what was being taken as insults, nor did he leave these legal experts without condemnation. Jesus condemned them for crushing people beneath impossible religious demands. These demands were the details the Pharisees had added to God's law. To the commandment, remember to observe the Sabbath by keeping it holy, for example, they had added instructions regarding how far a person could walk on the Sabbath, which kinds of knots could be tied, and how much weight could be carried. Instead of teaching God's law so that people could love, understand, and obey the God who gave it, they turned the law into such a confused maze of do's and don'ts that it had become a burden to the people. The legal experts refused to lift a finger to help the people. Verses 47 to 48. The tombs of the prophets were revered. People even decorated the graves of those long dead who seemed worthy of such honor. Building tombs over the graves of the martyrs was ironic because most of the prophets had been killed by the ancestors of this present religious establishment. In essence, these religious leaders were agreeing with the deeds of their ancestors and killing these prophets. Jesus was saying that these leaders were no different from their ancestors who had killed God's messengers because, in a sense, they were simply completing their work. The attitude of hatred for God's messengers would carry through, and Jesus himself would face it as well. Verses 49 through 51. God's prophets have been persecuted and murdered throughout history. But this generation was rejecting more than a human prophet. They were rejecting God himself. This quotation is not from the Old Testament. Jesus, the greatest prophet of all, was directly giving them God's message. Jesus gave two examples of martyrs in the Old Testament. Abel's death is recorded in Genesis chapter 4, verses 8, where he was the first martyr, the first to die because of his faithfulness to God. Zechariah's death is recorded in 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verses 20 through 22. Zechariah is a classic example of a man who was killed by those who claim to be God's people. The current religious establishment would be guilty of all their deaths, for they would be guilty of murdering the Messiah and would face judgment for that act. The destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 was a partial fulfillment of Jesus' words. Verse 52, the experts in religious law were effectively locking people out of God's kingdom. Their rejection of Jesus and emphasis on their petty demands had the effect of making them unable to enter the kingdom and then preventing those who might otherwise want to enter. Anyone who might have gotten in through a saving relationship with God was stopped short by their erroneous interpretations of Scripture and their added man-made rules. Then, as they prided themselves in their understanding, they themselves missed God's message. Caught up in a religion of their own making, they could no longer lead the people to God. They had closed the door of God's love to the people and had thrown away the keys. Verses 53 and 54, it may come as no surprise that these leaders were furious at Jesus. He had challenged these professed experts, so they hoped to trip him up and arrest him for blasphemy, heresy, or lawbreaking. They had to find a legal way to get rid of Jesus, so they grilled him with many hostile questions trying to trap him. Jesus had pointed out the blatant hypocrisy of so much of Israel's leadership, and there would be no turning back. The opposition was mounting. Jesus had become a threat to the establishment. All right. And as we see here, yes, Jesus pulled no punches. He spared no feelings when it came to telling the truth. And these Pharisees didn't like what he had to say, and the fact that he also said, you're just as guilty as your ancestors for killing the prophets, and because you're completing the job, you're finishing what they couldn't do. And so they didn't like what they heard. They didn't like what Jesus had to say, and it cut deep. So it wasn't anything that they could retort back with. So they start firing questions to see if we can find something else to trip him up on. All right. So that means what? That means that we're amping it up. We're getting ready to get close to that time where they're going to start setting Jesus up. All right, so that does it for chapter 11. I thank you so much for supporting this ministry and all that we do. Please continue always to keep studying.